Most people who aren't building wealth aren't failing because of bad luck. They're failing because of bad information. Not dramatically wrong information, not obvious misinformation that a moment of critical thinking would expose. Subtly wrong information. Ideas that sound completely reasonable, that have been repeated so many times by so many people that they've achieved the status of common knowledge, and that are quietly preventing an enormous number of people from taking the specific actions that actually produce financial results. Myths about money are uniquely dangerous because they don't feel like myths. They feel like wisdom. They get passed down from parents who believed them, reinforced by friends who repeat them, and validated by a culture that has organized itself around several of them in ways that make questioning them feel almost socially transgressive. The myth that you need a high income to build wealth keeps people waiting for a raise that will make wealth building feel possible, while the actions available at their current income go untaken. The myth that the stock market is too risky keeps savings in accounts that lose purchasing power to inflation every year, while the market compounds for people who understood the actual risk profile. The myth that debt is just a normal part of life keeps households funding interest payments that compound against them instead of attacking balances that compound for them. None of these myths were invented maliciously. Most of them contain a partial truth, a grain of reality that made the larger false conclusion feel logical. That's what makes them sticky. And that's what makes dismantling them specifically, with evidence and math, the most useful thing this video can do. Here are 9 myths about building wealth that are keeping people stuck, and the reality that replaces each one. Myth 1. You need a high income to build wealth. This is the myth that does the most damage because it is the most paralyzing. If wealth requires a high income and you don't have a high income, wealth is not currently available to you. The logical response is to wait for the promotion, for the raise, for the career breakthrough, before taking any meaningful financial action. The waiting feels rational, and every year of waiting costs more than the previous year because compound interest doesn't pause while income catches up. The research dismantles this myth comprehensively. According to Ramsey Solutions' survey of over 10,000 American millionaires, a largest study of millionaire behavior ever conducted, only 31% of millionaires averaged $100,000 or more in annual income throughout their careers. The majority built 7-figure net worth on incomes that most people would not consider wealth-building territory. The average millionaire reached that status after 28 years of consistent behavior. The variable that separated wealth builders from non-wealth builders at similar income levels was not a subsequent income breakthrough. It was savings rate and investment consistency starting at whatever income was available. The math makes this concrete. Someone earning $50,000 annually, who saves and invests 20% of income, $10,000 per year, at 8% annual returns, accumulates approximately $1.2 million over 30 years. Someone earning $120,000 annually, who saves 5% of income, $6,000 per year, at the same return rate, accumulates approximately $734,000 over the same period. The person earning less than half as much built 63% more wealth because the savings rate, not the income level, was the primary driver of the outcome. Wealth is not an income threshold. It is the gap between what comes in and what goes out, multiplied by time and compound interest. That gap is available at every income level above subsistence. The myth that it isn't keeps millions of people waiting for a starting condition that is already present. Myth 2. Investing is too risky for regular people. This myth is constructed from a real observation. The stock market goes down sometimes, dramatically and painfully, and a false conclusion that the downturns make long-term investing too dangerous for people who can't afford to lose. The false conclusion ignores two critical facts. First, the risk profile of stock market investing changes dramatically with time horizon. Short-term market exposure is genuinely risky. Markets can and do decline significantly over periods of months or a few years. Long-term market exposure, 20 years or more in a diversified index fund, has never produced a negative return in the history of the S&P 500. Not once. Every 20-year period in market history has ended higher than it started, including periods that included the Great Depression, multiple recessions, the dot-com crash, the 2008 financial crisis, and the pandemic collapse. Second, the myth treats not investing as a safe alternative. It isn't. Money held in a savings account or under a mattress loses purchasing power to inflation every year. At 3% annual inflation, $10,000 in a savings account today has the purchasing power of approximately $7,400 in 10 years. The account balance hasn't changed. The real value has declined by 26%. Not investing is not safety. It is a guaranteed slow loss disguised as stability. According to Dalbar's 2024 quantitative analysis of investor behavior, the average equity investor earned 6.81% annually over the past 20 years. The S&P 500 returned 9.74% annually over the same period. The gap is not explained by market risk. It is explained by investor behavior. People selling during downturns and buying during recoveries, converting what should be a long-term compounding machine into a series of emotionally timed transactions that underperform the index they were invested in. The risk regular people face in the market is not market volatility. It is their own behavioral response to market volatility. An investor who buys a low-cost total market index fund and does not sell during downturns does not experience crashes as losses. They experience them as temporary price reductions on assets they intend to hold for decades. The recovery that follows every crash in market history converts those temporary price reductions into additional compounding fuel. The risk of not investing is larger, more certain, and more permanent than the risk of investing. The myth that keeps people out of the market is costing them more annually than the crashes they're trying to avoid. Myth 3. You need to time the market to invest successfully. This myth is the natural follow-on to myth 2 for people who accept that investing is necessary, but believe that doing it successfully requires knowing when to buy and when to sell, waiting for the right moment, avoiding the downturns, capturing the recoveries. It is one of the most extensively researched and consistently disproven ideas in all of personal finance. A study by Charles Schwab examined 5 hypothetical investors who each received $2,000 annually to invest over a 20-year period. The perfect market timer, someone who invested at the exact bottom every single year, ended the period with $151,391. The investor who simply invested on the first day of every year without any timing, no analysis, no waiting, no optimization, ended with $135,471. The difference between perfect market timing and complete indifference to timing was $15,920 over 20 years of annual investing. The investor who waited in cash for the right moment, trying to time entry points, ended with $90,171. Attempting to time the market cost this investor $45,300 compared to simply investing immediately regardless of conditions. The math reveals something counterintuitive but consistent across every study that has examined this question. Time in the market matters far more than timing the market. The investor who gets in early and stays in captures most of the available return. The investor who waits for the right moment misses the compounding that happens during the waiting. This myth is perpetuated by financial media that requires something to talk about every day. Market timing narratives: will the market go up or down? Is now a good time to buy? Should investors be cautious? Generate content and engagement regardless of their predictive accuracy. The underlying message that consistent early investment outperforms sophisticated timing gets less airtime because it produces no actionable daily narrative. The correct investment strategy for most people is also the simplest one. Invest consistently in diversified, low-cost index funds regardless of market conditions, and do not sell during downturns. This strategy requires no expertise, generates no interesting market commentary, and consistently outperforms the timing strategies that generate enormous amounts of financial media content.
Myth 4. Debt is just a normal part of life. This myth is the most culturally embedded on the list. In the United States, carrying debt has been normalized to the point where its absence feels unusual. A car payment is assumed. A credit card balance is standard. Student loans are a rite of passage. A mortgage is the responsible path to homeownership. The person who has none of these things is the anomaly, not the norm. The normalization is not accidental. It is the output of a consumer credit industry that generates hundreds of billions of dollars annually from interest payments, and that has successfully reframed debt from a temporary measure of last resort to a permanent fixture of middle-class financial life. Americans collectively owe $1.655 trillion in auto loan debt, $1.74 trillion in student loan debt, $1.28 trillion in credit card debt. These are not emergency borrowing numbers. They are the normalized financial baseline of a country that has been successfully convinced that owing money indefinitely is simply how adult financial life works. Wealth building cost of this normalization is calculable. The average household carrying $6,380 in credit card debt at 24% APR pays approximately $1,531 annually in interest. That $1,531 invested annually at 8% returns over 20 years becomes approximately $76,000. The normalized credit card balance costs $76,000 in foregone wealth over 2 decades, plus the $30,620 in interest paid directly to the lender, a combined wealth impact of over $100,000 for a balance that most Americans would describe as manageable. Genuinely wealthy people do not normalize debt. They may use debt strategically, a mortgage on an appreciating asset, business financing with clear positive return projections, but they treat consumer debt as an emergency requiring immediate resolution rather than a permanent monthly expense to be managed indefinitely. The reframe that changes behavior is simple but requires resisting significant cultural pressure. Debt is not normal. It is expensive. Every month a balance exists is a month the lender earns money that should be building your wealth instead. Treating debt elimination with the same urgency as investment is not deprivation or financial extremism. It is the mathematically correct response to a financial relationship that is actively working against you.
Myth 5. Renting is throwing money away. This myth has been repeated so frequently that it has calcified into conventional wisdom, and it sends people into home ownership decisions they aren't financially ready for. With down payments that deplete emergency funds, mortgage payments that strain monthly budgets, and transaction costs that require years of appreciation just to break even. The reality is nuanced and depends entirely on the specific financial context of the decision.
Renting is throwing money away only if the alternative, buying, would produce a better financial outcome given the actual variables of the specific situation. Those variables include local market conditions, expected tenure in the home, the opportunity cost of the down payment, the transaction costs of purchase and eventual sale, the carrying costs of ownership beyond the mortgage, and the available investment returns on capital not tied up in real estate equity. In many markets, for many buyers, renting and investing, the difference is mathematically superior to buying. A buyer who depletes $60,000 in savings for a down payment forgoes approximately $4,800 annually in investment returns on that capital at 8%. A renter who keeps that $60,000 invested and adds the difference between their rent and what a mortgage plus ownership costs would be to the investment portfolio compounds significantly faster than a buyer building equity in an expensive market. The New York Times Rent versus Buy calculator, one of the most sophisticated tools for this analysis, consistently shows that in high cost of living markets, with price-to-rent ratios above 20, renting and investing the difference outperforms buying over holding periods of less than 7 to 10 years. The myth causes the most damage when it pressures people into homeownership before they have the financial foundation to absorb it without compromising other wealth-building priorities. A house purchased with a depleted emergency fund, no retirement contributions, and a monthly payment that prevents saving is not a wealth-building asset. It is a financial constraint disguised as a milestone. Home ownership builds wealth under the right conditions. Renting does not automatically destroy it. The decision deserves analysis rather than the reflexive application of a cultural maxim that treats a complex financial calculation as a settled question. Myth 6. You should pay off your mortgage before investing. This myth sounds conservative and responsible, which is why it persists despite the math that consistently argues against it for most people in most circumstances. The logic appears sound. Debt is bad, paying it off is good. Eliminate debt before building investments. But this logic ignores the fundamental concept of the interest rate differential, the gap between what the debt costs and what the investment earns. A 30-year mortgage at 6.5% costs 6.5% annually on the outstanding balance. An S&P 500 index fund has returned an average of approximately 10% annually over the past 30 years. The mathematical case for investing rather than making additional mortgage payments rests on this differential. Every dollar directed towards extra principal payments instead of investing earns a guaranteed 6.5% return in avoided interest. Every dollar invested in a diversified index fund has historically earned approximately 10% annually. The 3.5% differential, compounded over decades, represents substantial wealth. Someone with a $300,000 mortgage at 6.5% who directs $500 monthly towards extra principal payments instead of investing pays off the mortgage approximately 9 years early and saves approximately $110,000 in interest. The same $500 monthly invested over the same period at 8% annual returns becomes approximately $221,000. The investment strategy produces $111,000 more in total wealth than the accelerated payoff strategy. The exception to this framework is high-interest consumer debt. Paying off a credit card charging 24% interest before investing is mathematically correct because no investment reliably returns 24% annually with the same certainty that paying off 24% debt does. The mortgage payoff myth fails specifically because mortgage rates are low enough that the investment return differential matters. For debt at rates above 8% to 10%, aggressive payoff before investing becomes the stronger mathematical case. The nuance is important. This is not an argument for carrying a mortgage forever or for ignoring debt.
It is an argument for making the decision based on the actual numbers rather than a cultural preference for debt elimination that ignores the opportunity cost of capital deployed in payoff rather than investment. Myth 7. Financial advisors are essential for building wealth. This myth benefits the financial advisory industry enormously, and the investors who believe it considerably less. The implied message is that wealth building requires expert guidance that the average person is not equipped to provide for themselves, that investing is complex enough that the cost of professional management is justified by the superior returns it produces. The evidence for superior returns from active professional management is essentially non-existent at the retail investment level. According to S&P's SPIVA 2024 report, 88% of actively managed large-cap funds underperformed the S&P 500 index over the preceding 15 years. The funds that beat the index in any given year do so largely through the randomness inherent in short-term market variation, and consistent outperformance across multiple years is statistically indistinguishable from luck. The average actively managed fund charges 0.5% to 1.5% in annual fees. A Vanguard Total Market Index fund charges 0.03%. On a $300,000 portfolio, a 1% annual advisory fee costs $3,000 per year. Over 20 years, the compounding effect of that fee differential, assuming the advisor neither beats nor trails the index, represents approximately $150,000 in lost wealth compared to self-directed index fund investing. The genuine value an advisor provides is behavioral, helping clients avoid the panic selling during downturns and the euphoric buying during market peaks that produce the performance gap documented in Dalbar's research. If an advisor prevents a client from selling during a crash that would have cost them 20% of their portfolio, that intervention may be worth multiples of the annual fee. But the behavioral value is available at much lower cost through fee-only fiduciary advisors, who charge flat fees for periodic consultations rather than percentage of assets fees that compound against the investor over decades. For most people with straightforward financial situations, earn income, invest in diversified index funds, maintain appropriate insurance, eliminate high-interest debt, the professional management model extracts more wealth than it creates. The tools required to build wealth without a full-service advisor are free, publicly available, and not technically complex. A tax-advantaged retirement account, a low-cost total market index fund, automatic contributions, time. The myth that these tools require professional intermediation is the myth that keeps the advisory fee flowing from investor portfolios to advisory firms for decades. Myth 8. More income will solve the problem. This myth is the emotional escape hatch that makes inaction feel temporary rather than permanent. Whatever financial problem exists right now, insufficient savings, persistent debt, no investment account, month-end cash flow shortfalls, will be solved by the income increase that's coming. More money will fix the situation. The current constraints are an income problem, not a behavior problem. The data on what actually happens when income increases is one of the most consistently disappointing findings in personal finance research. Lifestyle inflation, the expansion of spending to match income growth, occurs so reliably and so completely that income increases frequently produce almost no improvement in savings rate or investment capacity. The Goldman Sachs research finding that 41% of Americans earning $300,000 to $500,000 annually report living paycheck to paycheck is not an anomaly. It is the predictable outcome of the myth that more income solves financial problems without changing the behaviors that created them. The mechanism is simple. Someone earning $60,000 who cannot save consistently gets a raise to $75,000. The additional $15,000, approximately $1,000 monthly after tax, feels like the margin that makes saving finally possible. Within 6 months, the lifestyle has adjusted to the new income level. The apartment is slightly nicer, the car is newer, the restaurants are slightly better, the subscriptions have multiplied, the $1,000 monthly surplus has been absorbed entirely, and saving is still difficult. The problem was never the income. It was the behavior problem that instantly colonized any available financial margin. The research on this is unambiguous. People who save consistently at lower incomes save consistently after income increases. People who don't save consistently at lower incomes typically don't save consistently after income increases. They spend consistently at whatever level their income supports. The fix for insufficient saving is a behavioral one, not an income one. Automatic transfers that remove the savings decision from the monthly spending flow, predetermined allocation of income increases before lifestyle has time to absorb them, a spending plan that gives every dollar a destination before it arrives. These behavioral changes are available at the current income level. Waiting for more income to make them feel necessary is a form of postponement that costs with every passing year. Myth 9. Building wealth means sacrificing quality of life. This is the myth that makes all the others feel defensible. If wealth building requires misery, constant deprivation, relentless frugality, the elimination of every enjoyable expense, then the emotional cost of pursuing it feels genuinely too high. Who wants to spend decades grinding through austerity in exchange for a large account balance they might not live to enjoy? Nobody, and nobody has to, because the myth is false. The research on what wealth building actually requires does not describe deprivation, it describes specificity. People who build wealth are not people who spend nothing and enjoy nothing. They are people who have identified the spending categories that deliver genuine, lasting value to their specific lives and directed their resources there, while eliminating the spending that was happening automatically, invisibly, and without delivering satisfaction proportionate to its cost. The convenience store markup on a water bottle does not improve quality of life. The brand premium on generic ibuprofen does not improve health outcomes. The depreciation on a new car does not improve transportation quality. The launch premium on a smartphone does not improve communication. The subscriptions that accumulate and go unused are not improving anything. This spending is not quality of life. It is financial extraction disguised as normalcy. The money recovered by eliminating it does not go into a vault. It goes into investment accounts that compound quietly in the background, converting the automatic spending that was producing nothing into future wealth that eventually produces the actual quality of life that the spending was supposedly delivering. Research on the relationship between wealth and reported happiness consistently shows that financial security, the freedom to make choices without financial pressure, the capacity to absorb unexpected costs without crisis, the knowledge that the future is provided for, is one of the strongest contributors to sustained well-being available to people. The stress of financial insecurity is a quality of life cost that the myth ignores entirely. The relief of financial security is a quality of life gain that the myth refuses to count. Wealth building does not require sacrifice, it requires substitution, trading the spending that feels like quality of life but isn't for the financial behaviors that produce the actual security that underlies genuine well-being. The sacrifice framing is the myth. The reality is that the people who build wealth tend to report higher life satisfaction than the people who spend freely and arrive at retirement without options. The austerity is in the second story, not the first.
The 9 myths on this list share a structural feature that explains why they persist, despite being demonstrably false. Every one of them makes inaction feel rational. The income myth makes waiting feel responsible. The investment risk myth makes avoidance feel prudent. The market timing myth makes hesitation feel strategic. The debt normalization myth makes carrying balances feel ordinary. The renting myth makes premature home ownership feel obligatory. The mortgage payoff myth makes avoiding investment feel conservative. The advisor myth makes self-directed investing feel dangerous. The income myth makes behavioral change feel premature. The sacrifice myth makes wealth building feel not worth the cost. Together, they form a complete system of justifications for not taking the actions that build wealth, and every one of them has been either created or reinforced by industries that benefit financially from the inaction they produce. The investment industry benefits from the belief that professional management is necessary. The consumer credit industry benefits from debt normalization. The automotive industry benefits from the status association with new vehicles. The real estate industry benefits from the renting is waste narrative. The financial media benefits from market timing mythology. The consumer goods industry benefits from brand premium acceptance. The myths are not neutral cultural accidents, they're profitable narratives maintained by entities with financial stakes in their perpetuation. Replacing them with accurate information is not complicated. The math is available. The research is public. The tools required to build wealth on an average income are accessible to anyone with a bank account, an internet connection, and the willingness to act on information rather than mythology. The myths kept you stuck. The math shows you the way out. The only thing left is the decision to use it. If you made it all the way here, thank you for spending this time with me. And hey, if you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, subscribe and give it a quick like. I'll see you in the next one. Love you.